Running or lifting, which one actually makes your brain work better? Now, I've been asked this question for over 2 decades, and for most of that time, my honest answer was that they're both good, which is true, but it's about as useful as telling you to eat more vegetables. Now, here's what's changed. Research can now separate them. So we know that lifting is better at one specific thing your brain does, and running is better at another. And the surprising part is that it's probably the opposite way around to what you might have guessed. I'm Gavin Evers. I'm a strength conditioning and rehabilitation coach and cognitive performance specialist. And I've spent over 2 decades coaching people who think for a living. Now, this exact question comes up in almost every first conversation that I have, because these are busy people, right? And when your time's tight, you want to know that the training you're doing is getting you the most bang for your buck for the thing that you actually rely on, which is your brain. So by the end of this, you'll know which one to go for and when, based on what you have in your diary for that day or that week. Now, let's start with what they share, because I think this is where a lot of the confusion might come from. So both running or cardio and lifting increase blood flow to your brain. Both raise something called BDNF, which is kind of like fertilizer for your brain cells, and it helps them grow and hold onto the connections. And the reason that this matters is that BDNF is the thing that lets a brain cell strengthen a connection when you actually use it. Now, that's not a metaphor for learning. That is learning. That's what's happening at a physical level. Now, both types of exercise also lower inflammation, and they both protect the health and performance of your brain, not just now, but decades from now. So if you have a preference for weights or cardio, and you only ever really did one of them, you'll still be doing something genuinely good for your head, not just your body. But once you start to look closer, they stop being kind of interchangeable, because each one has a job it's better at, and it's usually not the one that you might assume. So let's take lifting first, because I think this one surprises people the most. So if I asked you which kind of exercise sharpens your focus, I think most people will probably say cardio, running, cycling, something getting the heart going. But when researchers put different types of exercise head to head, the strongest evidence for focus actually pointed towards lifting, specifically kind of resistance training. This had the best evidence for something called inhibitory control, and that's a slightly kind of clinical phrase that basically refers to your brain's ability to ignore the thing that doesn't matter, which means that you can focus on the thing that does matter. It's the thing that kind of stops you getting distracted every time you lose attention for a second, and it's what lets you think about the hard problem instead of reaching for your phone the second it gets a bit uncomfortable. And there's a genuine reason that lifting seems to train this so well. So if you think about what you're doing under a heavy weight, say for example, chest press, you're bracing, you're controlling a load, you're holding your form together while your body is under quite a lot of stress, and you're blocking out absolutely everything that isn't essential in that moment that you're completing that one rep. That is inhibitory control in physical form. You're rehearsing the exact skill in the gym that you then want when you're sitting at your desk. On top of that, lifting drives up a growth signal called IGF-1, and IGF-1 does something subtly different from the memory side of things. It helps your brain look after the cells and the control systems that you already have, which supports the survival of existing neurons, and it also helps to kind of clear out metabolic waste that builds up over time. So the easy way to think about this is that cardio tends to build new memory infrastructure, and lifting tends to protect and maintain the focus infrastructure that you've already got. So you're basically kind of building and protecting. So let me give you an example, because it will just kind of help me explain it better. So I had a client who was fit, really fit, they were cycling well over 100 miles a week and doing yoga on top of that. But they came to me convinced that something was wrong with their focus. They kept losing their thread, getting pulled off tasks, and it kind of got to a point where they'd actually put themselves in to have an ADHD assessment, because they were convinced that that's what the problem was. Now, I want to be careful here, because I'm not in the business of diagnosing anyone, and I'm certainly not going to tell you that exercise is a treatment for a condition like that. But knowing the research and knowing what had worked for me personally, I had a hunch, and for all their cardio and all their yoga, there was no resistance training anywhere in their week. So we added it in. Now, within 2 or 3 weeks, they came back and told me that the change in their focus was really noticeable. Not fixed, not cured, but they were sharper, they were more able to stay on one thing at a time, and from a musculoskeletal perspective, which is also obviously very important, they were getting much fitter, stronger and healthier. And when you understand the mechanism that this kind of training is quietly building this very system that your brain uses to filter out distraction, it stops sounding like a miracle and starts sounding like exactly what you might expect. So if your struggle is a non-stop inbox pulling you in 10 different directions, or a meeting where you just keep losing your place, lifting is a tool that could help improve all of that. Now, the other side, running and aerobic work in general, like fast walking, cycling, rowing, anything that raises your heart rate and holds it there. Now, this is the strongest evidence for memory, and I don't mean the kind of memory that you need to hold on to, like to remember a phone number for 10 seconds. I mean the deeper kind, information that's actually supposed to stick. The name of the person that you met last week, the detail from that report that you need on Thursday, the thing you learned on a course that you want to still have in 3 months' time. So here's the mechanism, and it's genuinely one of my favorite facts in this whole field. Now, a huge part of memory runs through a part of your brain called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is one of the very few areas of the adult brain that can actually grow new brain cells. So most of your brain doesn't do that, but this part, it does. And sustained aerobic exercise is one of the most reliable things that we know for supporting that growth. So when you go for a run, you're not just kind of clearing your head in some vague way. In a real physical sense, you're helping build the machinery or the infrastructure that holds on to what you learn. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because the science here is moving really, really fast. So when your muscles work, like they contract, they don't just move you around. They release chemical messengers into your blood, and some of them travel up and talk directly to your brain. Now, one of these has a name worth remembering, and if you're doing cardio, you'll have a better chance of remembering it, hopefully, but it's called irisin. Now, it's a hormone your muscle produces when they're working, when they're contracting. And as recent in 2025, I think it was, we got the first human evidence linking it to the size of those memory regions in the brain. And, just think about what that actually means. So your muscles are effectively acting like a gland, a lump of tissue on your arm or your leg, whatever, sending chemical instructions up to your brain. Now, we don't usually think of muscle as something that talks to the mind, but that's exactly what seems to be happening. Now, I'll be straight with you because I think this is really important, but a lot of this work is still pretty early, and a good chunk of it is in animals rather than people. So I'm not going to oversell it too much, but the basic picture is pretty remarkable. Your muscles appear to be talking to your brain, and one of the things that they seem to be saying is keep building memory. Now, that alone might change how you think about your workouts going forward. So let me just give you another example. It kind of helps me explain it a bit better. So I had a client in their late 40s who worked at an accountancy firm, though they weren't actually a qualified accountant, but they decided that they wanted to change that. So they wanted to sit their exams and qualify properly. Now, the problem was, they knew the material, they'd been kind of in and around that office environment for ages, but they couldn't get the facts and figures to stay in their heads, especially long enough for the exam. And they'd quietly decided that it was probably their age, that the retention just wasn't there anymore. Now, I didn't think that was the case. So instead of just telling them to go and run twice a week, which would have been a bit rubbish on my part, we did something way more deliberate. We sat down with their actual work diary and we worked out exactly when their revision sessions were going to be, and then we built their cardio around those sessions. Now, we were deliberate about the intensity, the duration, how hard we were pushing the heart rate. All of it timed to support the studying rather than compete with it. Now, the results were genuinely great. The material started sticking in a way that it had never done before. And obviously nothing about her age or the setup, the situation had changed. What changed was that we'd used exercise as a tool to enhance her physiology and her brain for learning. Now, if you're interested, yeah, they went on and they passed their exams, and now they're a qualified chartered accountant, which was fantastic. So I'm going to take all the credit for that one. So if I can just take a minute to kind of give you a bit of a summary. So lifting sharpens your focus, running, or cardio, sorry, I should say, strengthens your memory. Neither one is the all-purpose winner because they're not solving the same problem. And if you already do both, that's fantastic because there's solid evidence that combining the two gives you a much wider spread of benefit than either one alone because you're training two different systems, right, instead of just the one. Now, I should just mention that there's a third part to all of this. The more kind of mind-body end of the movement things. So things like kind of yoga and Tai Chi. Now, they've shown up strongly in the research for a different skill, which is kind of mental juggling, you know, switching from different tasks, task to task. And I'm not going to go down that route too much today, but it's worth knowing that the picture is much, much richer than just run versus lift. Again, I want to be really straight with you about all of this because I want you to trust me. I don't want you to think I'm just kind of overselling this for whatever reason. But a lot of this research has been done on older adults, and this is not a bad thing, but it's because that's where most of the concern about memory and decline is, right? And that's where a lot of the funding is also. So we've got less direct head-to-head data in busy working age professionals specifically. The mechanisms look the same across the ages though, and the early signs in younger adults point the same way. But I just want to tell you that honestly, rather than pretend that this is all 100% settled, although it's not like I'm recommending medication here. So the side effects of doing your resistance work and your cardio is that you're just going to get stronger and fitter, right? So from an overall health and longevity angle, it's the ultimate goal anyway. And I would always advise cardio and strength training anyway. So here's what I actually tell clients. So the question isn't which one is better. It's what does your diary look like this week? I think that's always a good place to start. So a week that's back-to-back meetings, decisions and distraction coming at you from every single angle, that's a week where lifting should be the priority. Now, a week where you're trying to generally learn something and keep hold of it, maybe it's revision or research, that's a week for prioritizing cardio or running, whatever you prefer. You still want to do both cardio and weights, but your work diary will influence what you prioritize and when you schedule it. And you can be really clever about this. You know, if you know that your Monday is back-to-back meetings and Wednesday is the day that you sit down to do all your kind of analytical deep work, you've now got a real reason to lift early in the week and run midweek. You're not just kind of training on autopilot anymore. You're lining your training up with the work that actually matters. So the mistake was never picking the wrong one. The mistake is treating this like a contest with one single winner, when what you've actually got is two really good tools for two different jobs. So do both, but prioritize the one your week needs the most. Next week, I'm going to go one level deeper on exactly how to time this around your day. So if that's useful, keep an eye out for that. And if you want a clearer picture of where your own brain performance stands right now, how you're moving, sleeping, and eating, and how it's all showing up in your focus and energy, then I put together a free 3-minute assessment, and it looks at exactly that, and I'll put the link in the description. And if this is the kind of thing that you find useful and interesting, the newsletter is where I go deeper every single week. So subscribe below, and I'll see you there. Have a good one.